Boom. There you go. And we're on. That's 2 in a row, Larry.
I'm doing better.
You're doing all right. I like it. Okay. Hi, everybody. Now that we're done with all of our messing about, we're in Romans chapter 11. We're actually cruising right along in chapter 11. And we are about halfway through 11, I guess you could say. We're about to get about halfway through 11 here. We just, for those of you in the cheap seats, because the only people that were here last time was Sherry. Was it Sherry?
No.
Oh, and Donald, Sherry and Donald.
And Sarah and your mom.
Well, I know, but they're not here. So anyway, we went through chapter 11, verses 7 through 14. Actually, we were halfway through 7 through 14. We didn't get through that whole thing. We are talking about the concept of the elect, or a remnant, is what is being used here. In the prior verses, the prior chunk, I should say, that we went through was 5 through 7. In that chunk, we learned about that remnant. The remnant being a people left over for a special purpose. The elect that we're talking about here, that word elect is the act of God choosing or handpicking some to hold an office or to receive a blessing by being utilized by God in some function. All right. So the word elect and remnant are similar in that respect, that it's God choosing them for a specific purpose. As we've seen before in the concept of predestination and all that kind of stuff, God chose some to be utilized for His will and His purpose, and we're going to go over that more today. And He chose some to be hardened. He gave them over to their own desires to allow them to harden their hearts and pit themselves against God. And the purpose of doing that was, of course, to be able to show His power and His glory. And we're going to talk about that today. But in that chunk that we had before, 5 through 7, that's where He kind of talked about that elect, that remnant that was left over. The remnant was there. They used the passage from Elijah, where Elijah, calls down fire from heaven, all that kind of good stuff, and then all of a sudden he gets a death threat against him, and he runs scared. God comes before him and says, you feel like you're alone, but I want you to feel like you're alone because I've got 7,000 men sitting in reserve. I've got a remnant. I've got a thing. So this idea of this remnant is the idea that which we started in verse 7 through 14. Yeah, let's just go to 7 through 14. 7 says, "What then? Israel is not obedient. Israel has not obtained what it seeks, but the elect have obtained it, and the rest are blinded." Okay, verse 7. There it says that Israel has not obtained it. The it they're talking about is all the blessing, all the promises that were given to the nation of Israel by God. And Paul is saying, what you're saying is that we as Israel are kind of just tossed aside. We're not going to get anything. We were God's chosen people. He gave us His law. He chose us to be, His chosen people to the world. And now, because of a select few, because a vast majority of the people have rejected God, now what? We're all going to get tossed aside because we're not being faithful. And Paul is trying to get us to understand that there's this concept of this remnant, a select few, the remnant, which he kind of, I kind of identified. He didn't identify. I think he's identifying it as the true nation of Israel. All right? The majority does not always speak for everybody. All right? The minority, there is still always a minority of people that God always takes and utilizes to get stuff done. All right? And He'll always have a remnant or an elect that he will have to get stuff done, okay? Because once again, Paul has, not Paul, but God has the big picture, and he's always going to get done when he needs to get done, and he'll set aside people to get that thing done. So the nation of, so Paul's addressing the elephant in the room, kind of like, so, the people of Israel as a whole may be thinking to themselves, well, are we going to get tossed aside because we weren't all faithful, type of thing. Now, Paul, in the beginning of 7 through 14, kind of goes through a classification, I guess you could say, a helpful description of the difference between two different concepts. And these two different concepts is punishment and discipline. Okay, and this is what we kind of ended last week, is punishment and discipline. Punishment deals with justice, all right? It's the consequences for doing something wrong, for sin, okay? Punishment is that. It's the consequence, it's the negative consequence. You did something negative, there's a negative thing coming your way, okay? That's punishment, okay? Discipline, on the other hand, deals with sanctification. It deals with those being set aside, and Paul kind of viewed that in kind of a twofold perspective, I guess you could say, in that we see here that he uses the example in verse 9. In verse 9, verse 8. Verse 8, he quotes Deuteronomy 29:4, which says, verse 8, it says, just as it was written, God has given them the spirit of stupor, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear, to this very day. That quote comes from Deuteronomy 29:4 through 6, and it's a direct quote to the nation of Israel right after they had been wandering around the desert for 40 years. So that whole story, that whole concept is that the nation of Israel was, God led them to the promised land like he promised, once again, and they sent 12 people in. 12 people went in, 12 people came back, 10 people came back and said, no way, there's no way we're going into this land. There's giants there, there's crazy people in there, we ain't going to make it. 2 people came back and said, no, trust God. We saw the same thing they saw, but we believe in God, we trust God. We should do that. But the choice was made as a nation not to go. Okay? So, is it fair or not fair? And the answer is, it doesn't matter if it's fair or not fair, because of the perspective Paul has, that all 12 tribes, even though 2 may have, even though not everybody agreed, there was a small minority that didn't agree, but the majority, swayed the vote for everybody to do it, but everybody did it. So is it fair that everybody should be punished? Well, there's a difference between punishment and discipline, okay? This is discipline. This isn't punishment, all right? Punishment is you do something bad's coming to you. Discipline is a way of teaching and growing and directing and guiding. They went to go into the promised land, and they didn't go into the promised land, so now he's disciplining them and letting them and then he took them and wandered them around in the desert. Now, when he wandered them around the desert, did they just, that phrase I kind of made, that's kind of a total misnomer, wandering around the desert, because they weren't wandering anywhere. God led them around, okay? God led them around the desert. God made sure in this verse in Deuteronomy 29:4 through 6, it says, yet to this day the Lord has not given you a heart to know, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear. That's where you get this quote from here in Romans. I have led you for 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you. Your sandals have not worn out on your feet. You have not eaten bread nor have drank wine or strong drink, in order that you might know that I am the Lord your God. God always provided for them some water. He always provided for them food. He always provided for them. Their clothes never wore out, and for 40 years, whenever you watched Gilligan's Island, they always, they were stuck on that island forever, and they always wore the same thing, and it never wore out. Well, that's them. All right, that's the nation of Israel. All right, they were walking around with a red shirt on and a white hat. No, their clothes never wore out. Their sandals never wore out. God always provided for them. So Paul, I think, is making that segue to get them to understand that. For those who were lost, this is a perfect opportunity for them to get their heads right. You know, this is a judgment. This is a discipline. In that discipline, hopefully you're going to learn something from it. Okay? For those minority that were the elect, this is an opportunity for them to see God's provision and understand that God is still protecting them. See, it's kind of a twofold philosophy. Is it fair that everybody gets disciplined? Well, everybody went along with it, so everybody gets disciplined. Okay, but for those who are the elect, that God is held aside to be able to accomplish what He needs to accomplish. For those people, they get the opportunity to see God in action. For the people that are lost, those people get the opportunity to see God in action and understand the error of their ways and come to that reality. So there is a benefit for everyone. Okay, and that's where we kind of left off. Okay, God, and this right here, this concept, this area right here, I'll tell you right now, I believe gives strong evidence to the concept of dispensational theology, because it gives us the concept that we're about to get into about this whole concept of setting Israel aside. And in setting them aside is also a terrible phrase, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but setting Israel aside so that the grace of God could come and be manifest to all people. Okay? And this was a disciplinary action, not a punishment, and that's where they need to. And we're going to get into that right now. Okay? God set them aside. All right? And that's where we left off, was in verse 8. Verse 9 is also an Old Testament reference that was made about a poem that David wrote back in Psalm 69. It says here in Romans, in verse 9 and 10, it says, "Let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block, and a recompense to them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they do not see, and bow down their back always." Let's stop right there. This is a snippet, once again, of a larger passage that is found in Psalm 69, and I just happen to have it. If you want to look at it, you can look at it, but I'm going to read it to you. Not the whole thing. This is David talking, and David is kind of given this kind of lament, kind of a poem type of a thing. He starts off in 16, "Hear me, O Lord, for your loving kindness is good, turning to me according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Do not hide your face from your servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Draw near to my soul and redeem it, and deliver me because of my enemies." Okay? Verse 18 is key. He's saying, draw near to my soul and redeem it, deliver me because of my enemies. So every time you hear him from now on reference to them, he's talking about redeeming his soul and getting away from his enemies. Okay? So now he says, you know my reproach, my shame, my dishonor. My adversaries, once again his enemies, my adversaries are all before you. Reproach has broken my heart, and I am full of hardness. Look for someone to take. I looked for someone to take pity, but there was none. I like this little passage right here too, and I'm going to talk about it more. You can turn there if you want to, because I'm going to spend some time here, I guess. They also give me gall. They also give me gall for food, and for my thirst they give me vinegar to drink. Let their table become a snare before them, and their well being a trap. Let their eyes be darkened so that they do not see, and make their loins shake continuously. Pour out your indignation upon them, and let your wrathful anger take hold of them. And then it goes on and on and on and on and on. It says, I will praise the name of God. In verse 29 it says, but I am poor and sorrowful. Let your salvation, O God, set me up on high. I will praise the name of God with a song, and will magnify the name, magnifying him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord, better than an ox or a bull, which has horns or hooves. verse 35, for God will save Zion and build the city of Judah, and they may dwell there and possess it. Also, the descendants of his servants shall inherit it, and those who love him shall dwell in it. Okay, that's the end of 69 there. Basically, in a nutshell, what?
I don't know if I heard something.
I've heard 2 different times something going off.
Oh. Oh, is it the door?
I don't know. It was.
Oh. I heard a phoning kind of thing. Anyway, basically in a nutshell, what David's psalm here is saying is that any kind of discipline is not going to last forever. Okay, he starts off lamenting about how sorrowful he is and how his enemies are against him and stuff like that. We get that reference there in the middle of it in 22. Let their tables become a snare before them, and their well being a trap, which is the part that we get from Romans. Talking about his enemies and his troubles and things like that. But then towards the end of the psalm, he says that, your salvation, O God, will set me up on high. Even though I'm low now, you will set me up on high. You will save me. I will be, I'll be with you, and yada, yada, yada. So basically the psalm, in a nutshell, is about how he may be low now, but the Lord it won't last forever. And the Lord will lift you on high. You know what I'm saying? That's the gist of the psalm that Paul's making reference to here. People would know this psalm back then. I had to read it to you in length because that's not something we would know or study per se right off the bat. You know what I'm saying? In this particular verse, the thing that I think is way cool that David is talking about here is that he says, and do not hide your face. In verse 17 he says, and do not hide your face from your servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Verse 18, draw near to my soul and redeem it. Deliver me because of my enemies. And then he mentions these 3 things. Draw near to my soul, redeem it, and deliver me because of my enemies. And then he goes on to say, you know my reproach, my shame, and my dishonor. Okay? And there he mentions 3 more things. You know my reproach, my reprimand, my shame, and my dishonor. My adversaries are all before you. Verse 20, he says, reproach has broken my heart. Okay? So he's saying, draw near to my soul, all right? And you know my reproach. You know that discipline. That thing has broken my heart. And then he says, I am full of heaviness. He's talking about his soul. He wants it to be redeemed. And he's talking about his shame, all right? And he's talking about how he is full of heaviness. And he says he's looking for someone to take pity, but there is none. And he's talking about delivering him from his enemies. And he's talking about how he is dishonored because he hasn't fallen after the Lord. And he's looking for somebody to honor him, but he can't find anybody. In these few verses, he mentions 3 things, and then he mentions 3 things to reinforce it, and then he mentions 3 things to reinforce it again, and then later on, he talks about how your salvation, God's salvation will lift him on high, will praise his name, and he will praise his name in song, and he will magnify him with thanksgiving. Let heaven and earth praise him, the seas and everything, and move him. For God will save Zion. Okay, so he's looking for salvation in that beginning part. Here you see he will sit, and there's going to be salvation given. Building the city of Judah, and they will dwell there and possess it. That gives them a place of honor, which is not shameful. All right, and also the descendants of the servants will inherit it, and those who love his name shall dwell in it. So there we see where you were dishonored, now you sit in a place of honor. So it's kind of, this whole psalm is kind of this mirroring thing. It's kind of a cool thing. I know we're not studying psalm, but if we ever did, this little thing that he's got right here is kind of cool. Anyway.
Isn't that something how he starts off, and then as he talks to the Lord, his attitude changes. That's like
right.
we were talking with Carol Wilkinson. a lot of times, you know, when you think about when you're, you know, and other people too, you know, when you're down and, you know, you get the word of God out and then you start thinking about, well, it's not really that bad, you know.
Right.
You know, and then you end up praising the Lord at the end, you know, and that seems like that's what he's
Right.
doing here.
Well, I think that's what he
You know?
does, and that's human nature. Once you get it out, once you verbalize it, once you get it off your chest, then you kind of realize, okay, I see it for what it is. You know, when you're thinking about it, the weight of it seems so immense. But once you start visualizing it and speaking it,
Yeah.
then you put it into the perspective of what it is, and then it gets turned around. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of the concept here. Is David is kind of saying, hey, this is, you know, this discipline isn't going to last forever. You know what I mean? Even though he fell down, God will lift him up. You know what I mean? And that kind of thing. And that's what he's doing. Unfortunately, the lost always outnumber the minority, of course. You know what I'm saying? Of the remnant type of a thing, of that elect. And that always holds true today. And that brings us to verse 11, which says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? That they should fall? And Paul answers, but certainly not. He's talking about them. You know, he makes this quote to this hymn saying, you know, things don't last forever. Okay? So does that mean that just because Israel stumbled that they will fall away? And he's saying certainly not. He uses this idea of a runner. Okay? If a runner's running in a race and a runner stumbles, does that mean the runner's out of the race? No. If a runner falls on his face, I mean, you're not going to be able to recover from that probably. You know, if you don't hurt yourself, by the time you get up and get back in the race, I mean, it's going to be over. But if you stumble, that doesn't mean you're out of the race. It just means you just had a misstep. Okay? And that's kind of what he's kind of saying about the nation of Israel here, is that are they disqualifying themselves? Are they being wadded up and tossed away? Are they being forgot about? And all the wonderful blessings of everything are now being passed on in this new covenant to the Gentiles? No, that's not what he's saying. What he is saying, though, is that there is this setting aside concept, this setting aside. And in setting aside the whole, even though you will keep a small remnant to do what needs to be done, you're still going to, discipline the whole. And that's that whole concept of setting them aside. And when you set them aside, like we said, setting them aside sometimes has a twofold thing. For the elect, it has the opportunity to see the wonderment and the provision of God. And for the ones who are being, for those that are lost, they get a chance to repent. Well, that concept right there is grace. Okay? I've got all these dispensational charts and all this stuff up here and all this kind of stuff. That whole concept of the law and grace, some people have viewed the law as being, this thing, and then all of a sudden it was broken in half and grace was kind of dropped right in the middle of it. All right? Not a bad viewpoint, but it gives the idea that God just kind of shot from the hip and did this, and I think that's not the case. I think there's Scots blame all the time. We use this concept of setting aside because that's our finite way of explaining it. But I don't think it was a setting aside in that God had to change gears because the nation of Israel was dumb. Okay? I don't think that's the case. I think that was the plan. Okay? I think it was the plan all along. But God still will fulfill the promises to the nation of Israel once the discipline is over. And in that discipline, there's two very important things that happen in the middle of that discipline. The first thing that happens is that God gives now God has the ability, as we're going to see in verse 12, now if their fall, okay, so he's talking about a runner, he's talking about does a runner stumble, but through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, okay, this is the first thing, but through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Verse 12, now if their fall is riches for the world, then their future riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? the first thing we get to see here is that God's master plan is unfolding. The nation of Israel may be, what we call being put on pause or set aside or something like that. But God is showing us this discipline, and through this discipline, he's now giving the Gentiles, or everybody, basically, the same footing. Everybody, because of that stumble, because of that fall, we're disciplining you, okay? But it doesn't mean you're out. It just means now, because of that, the first thing is, now everybody gets to benefit from that, okay? Everybody gets to benefit from that. The elect, we always saw that there are two perspectives, one for the elect and one for the lost, okay? So for the elect, now everybody gets to join in with you in these wonderful blessings, okay? In this discipline, before God fulfills his promises to the nation of Israel, because of this setting aside or putting on pause, however you want to phrase it, which was always God's plan, it's not him just doing it to do it. For the elect, we get to see that now God has the ability to provide for everybody to join in on what this smaller group or this elect or this remnant gets to take part in. Everybody gets to benefit from that. And that's amazing. Now this opportunity of grace is provided for everyone. And the second thing is, for the lost, they may be, grumbling, but this is a time for them to understand and repent and to understand their position. This is their opportunity right now, right there. This is where they get the opportunity to become jealous. Okay, the word used there is jealous. That word jealous, the word jealous is probably not a great rendering. He's trying, because of this grace that is now provided for everybody, that word jealous could better be, the verb tense of it could better be used as zeal. Okay? As zeal. He's provoking them to zeal. Let me give you an example. Alright, suppose, brand new restaurant in town. Fancy schmancy, serve everything you can think of. Great reviews, wonderful place. Fancy schmancy place. You go in there, you're going to go out to eat. It's like you guys do today. You get to go out to dinner, you're going to go there. So you get in there, and you sit down. The place is super nice, and everything's all, really comfy, and everything's just really warm. And you can smell the food coming out from the kitchen and all kinds of stuff. And you look at the menu, and you realize that this place is way out of your price range. And all you can really afford is like a drink, a hot dog and a drink. You know what I mean? You're at this super fancy place. That's all you can pull off is what and you're thinking, well, we're here, it's date night, why not? So while that's happening, this party of, like 12 people come in, and they sit down at this big table right, just adjacent from you, and they come in and they order everything in their mother. They order all the fancy schmancy stuff and all the glorious stuff, and an army of people from the kitchen come out and bring all this wonderful, glorious food and set it onto the table, and the smell is just wafting the whole building and stuff like this. And all of a sudden, those 12 people decide, you know what, I don't know that we really want to eat this. I think we'll pay for the meal and everything, but I don't think this is what we want to go. We got to go. So they pay for the meal, and they get up and they leave. All right? So they've been there all night. It's closing time. It's close to closing time anyway. And they've made all this food, and it's already been paid for. So the owner kind of looks over at you guys and goes, hey, you want to jump in on this? We've got all this food and it's already made. We were probably going to just take some of it and give it to maybe some of the staff, but you guys can jump in here too. And before the words come out of his mouth, there's a little dust pile where you were, and your feet are underneath that table, man. You're going to town. Ooh, yeah, baby. So and you're going and you're eating it. You're being able to benefit from the wonderful blessing. Well, now suppose that group of 12 that came in, they left, and then they get halfway down the block and they think to themselves, that was kind of dumb. We're kind of hungry. We probably should have eaten that food. Well, we can always go back and get it. Okay, let's go back and get it. Well, they go back and get it. Well, it's closing time now, so the door's locked. They can't get in. So they're pressing their face against the window, looking in as you're eating all their food, the big old smell of it. Hi, and you're not doing it to mock them, but they're looking in and seeing this going on. Well, imagine that in a spiritual sense, that, they had this wonderful abundance and they set it aside, okay? and made the opportunity for everybody, large and small, from the wait staff to the dishwashers to the guests who don't normally be able to take part in that kind of thing. They all get to experience that abundance, but this other group is like, hey, wait a minute, we want in. They're not provoking them to jealousy that they're mad at you for eating their food. They're provoking you to zeal, because the zeal is more about the fact that they're hungry. They went there in the first place because they were hungry. They went there to eat, and then decided they just didn't want to eat, but then realized that was a bad thing. They're all wishy-washy doing this and that, even though they had all the provisions that God had provided for them. You know what I'm saying? And because of that wishy-washiness, now they're being disciplined because of that. And he's trying to provoke them to zeal. In chapter 10, we found out that they were zealous, right? That the nation of Israel was zealous, but they were zealous without knowledge. Remember, Paul used himself as an example. He said, well, I thought that I was very zealous. I was more zealous than any of them. You know, I was going out killing Christians, you know, people that followed the word. But I found out that I was wrong. You know, God showed me that I was wrong, you know. So being zealous without knowledge or without direction or without guidance is not always a good thing. What he's talking to them here is he's trying to, you know, hopefully they'll get provoked to that zeal, that hunger, you know, just like that discipline, to understand that they've done something wrong and understand they want to strive for more and to get back into it and to become part of that group again. Okay? So, does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. That's what he's talking about, is that they're going to, you know, discipline, you know, is a beautiful thing for everybody, even those who may be considered the elect or the remnant, because in that they get to enjoy those blessings and wonderment and get to be joined with people in that, and the grace of God gets to be outpoured to everyone. You know what I mean? And that's a wonderful thing. Once that grace has been fulfilled and that discipline has been fulfilled, well, then that grace will be over, and then the program will start up again. The pause button will be unhit, and then his promises will be fulfilled, and the nation of Israel will then, of course, get their covenant promises, and they're not going to get just some little strip of land. I got maps all over the place. Not some little strip of land right there off the thing. They're going to get all these wonderful promises that were given to them, and everything's going to be of this huge abundance, and God's going to provide for them. They're going to be they're going to have victory. They're going to have blessings beyond comparison, and all these things are going to be wonderful. Okay? So in verse 11 is the key. He's saying, have you stumbled and should you fall, so now you're out of it? No, you're not out of it. Okay? In discipline, he says, through their fall, hopefully it will provoke you to zeal, that salvation has come to the Gentiles. Verse 12, now if that fall riches for the world, and their failure riches to the Gentiles, how much more their fullness. Once everything comes back online, you're going to get everything. And you see here, these last few verses here, 13 and 14, before we're done here, because, we're getting close. I'm good. He talks here in 13 and 14, he says, for I speak to you Gentiles insomuch as my ministry. He's the guy who's preaching to the Gentiles. That's what he's saying here. I know it sounds weird, but that's what he's saying. I'm the guy that's bringing the gospel message to the Gentiles. That's what he's saying. So, for I speak to you Gentiles, because I'm the guy who's bringing the message to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. Verse 14, if by any means I may provoke zeal those who are of my flesh, or those who are Israelites, because he's one too. You know what I mean? And he's talking, and he says that all the time, that he's always talking about his people, and his people are these Israel people. He's part of that too. Okay? He's saying, zeal for those who are of my flesh, and save some of them. He's hoping that that's just going to drive them and motivate them and push them towards that. Paul kind of shows a little bit of himself there. He's saying, I know what my ministry is, and I know what God has sent me to do, and I'm faithful to do that, but I still just kind of wish, you know, I still kind of wish that, you know, my people would get on board, you know what I mean? That they would just understand, and that they would understand that this discipline is of benefit to them, because they get to repent or of what they've done and see the wonderment of God and the blessings that are there. All right? Does that make any sense? Does that kind of explain a little bit of perspective on why he's making these Old Testament references and what the pertinence of those things are and what he's trying to say? Does that kind of all bring together? So with that, you have to understand that concept of the majority versus the minority, the remnant versus the vast majority, and the idea of punishment versus discipline. We're talking about discipline. We're not talking about punishment, eternal punishment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about discipline. And in that discipline, he's disciplining the remnant, and he's also disciplining the lost. But in that, you can see it magnified, threefold and, twofold, threefold into different areas and different things, and that's what he's trying to magnify to us. And through it, we have the dispensation or the administration of grace that we have now, where we get to live, this wonderful place that we all kind of live and thrive in right now. And that's what we're trying to figure out, how to live and to thrive in that new area that we're living in, which is this wonderful grace. And he's trying to explain that not just to the Gentiles, because the Gentiles get to take part in this wonderful thing. The Israelites, they're the ones that think they're getting shafted, but they're not. He's letting them know, you're not out. Yeah, maybe the blessings have been put on pause for right now, but now because of that, through this discipline, some wonderful things have come about for everyone. And when the time comes of that discipline, or when the time comes when that is over, then God will fulfill those promises, and everything's going to get back on track the way it was. But during that time, this could be a magnificent time for you to enjoy the grace of God. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or comments? Sure.
No.
All right. That was great.
Okay. I've
Yeah.
got a note here.
Yeah, sure. Good.
From sometime, verse 11, it says, have they stumbled that they should fall? It says, certainly not. Then he turns right around and says, but through their fall. But I've got a note here that says, and I don't know what the Greek is, but the first fall says, should they fall? And I've got a note there that they should stay down and not get up.
Right.
And the second fall is a temporary fall.
Right. Yes.
And so is the next fall. So,
You must
Yeah.
have been listening to the same pastor, because that's what I'm
Oh, look at that.
yeah.
I got a misstep on the second one, and the first one, a fall, but a fall where they will get back up again.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Wow. So yes, so that's what we're looking at here. And once again, we're looking at the concept of the elect versus the majority. You know what I mean? Because you're looking at a fall. The majority thinks that they're down and out because they're down and out. That's all there is. And the majority is thinking of that stumble. Thinking the elect is thinking about that stumble because they're still in the race. You know what I'm saying? So you can see how those things mirror throughout the different passages there. So yeah, and you got to understand that is how God does his best work, is through the minority, not the majority. I mean, Scripture is jam-packed with stories of how God stacked the deck against himself for the express purpose of showing his power, his honor, and his glory. You know what I mean? Israel wandering around the desert, being directed. Their clothes didn't wear out. Their sandals didn't fall apart. They had food and water everywhere they went. I mean, they literally just packed up everything and just started walking. All right? And in that time, they always had provision. They complained about it the whole time because they're a bunch of whiners, but they had provision. Elijah. He uses Elijah as a perfect example, where Elijah went up against 450 prophets and whatnot and followers of Baal, and Baal, who is the rain god, who God put a judgment upon them that it wasn't going to rain until Elijah said so. So for years it didn't rain, and then he says, okay, let's get this done here. Let's go up on the mountain. Let's do what we're going to do. 450 of the prophets are up there. They built an altar. They put their offering on it, and Elijah built his his altar and put his offering on it. Okay, you guys do your thing, and when you're done, whoever's God, takes the offering, they win. And all day long, all they did was dance around, jump around, cut themselves, did all kinds of bloodletting, crazy stuff and everything. And finally, Elijah's like, enough, it's my turn now. And, once again, he, and that's kind of why he kind of felt like he was by himself, per se, because the nation of Israel was not following after God, but they were there watching. And all the prophets of Baal, all the king, the king and all the people that were there, tons of people on this mountain. God says, soak it 3 times, build a trough around it. He soaked it. This thing was filled up with water. He makes one simple prayer, calls down fire from heaven, takes out the offering, takes out the altar, takes out the water, and leaves a little smoking crater where everything was before. All right? God always utilizes the underdog to make a point. And I think that's awesome, because we need to realize that so often in our lives, we don't understand what's happening. Sometimes we feel like the underdog. Sometimes we feel like the deck's stacked against us. And to be honest with you, sometimes it is. Sometimes the deck is stacked against us. And we may be thinking to ourselves, what did I do? Why do I deserve this? And the real answer could possibly be nothing. This could be an opportunity. Romans 8:28, God uses all things to work together for good for those who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. This could just be one opportunity that God uses you as the underdog to show his power and his honor and his glory in this wonderful place of grace that we live in. And that's magnificent. You may not think of it while you're going through whatever struggle you're going through, but on the other side, you get to look back on it and go, wow, and get to experience the wonderful blessings that he has, and understand that God always fulfills his promises. Here, Paul's telling these guys, it's going to come about, it just ain't time yet, and we have that same, God's going to fulfill the promises that he has for us. Maybe it hasn't happened yet, because it ain't time yet. The lesson hasn't been learned, or the message hasn't been broadcasted, or whatever the case may be, but the fact remains that God is faithful, and he's going to take care of those things. So that is the end of verse 14. And next time we will start a whole new section, Romans 11:15 through 29, another section of scripture that we're going to talk about, and we'll go through that piece at a time as well. How was that? Does that make sense to you guys? Understand that?
Yes.
Did that come through a little bit better through that explanation? Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Well, alrighty then.
Just God gets bigger and bigger.
Oh yeah,
And bigger.
yeah, absolutely. I love doing studies like this, because when you read the passage, it may speak to you, and you may think, wow, that's pretty powerful. And then once you really get into the nitty-gritty and start looking at the context of it and the things that were going on, maybe culturally or historically, maybe you start to see the impact of God's plan in it and stuff. It just becomes richer and richer and richer, and you can continue to unpack it that way. And it's amazing. It's the gift that keeps on giving. All right, let's pray, and then we'll be done with this. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time that we have to gather together here to read your word and to just get into it, get studying it. And dear Lord, thank you so much for all that you do. Your discipline, your provision, your blessings, your struggles, everything that you have or allow to happen is all for your honor, for your glory, for your outworking of the plan that you have for us. And dear Lord, I'm thankful that I get to be part of that plan. Sometimes that plan may be difficult, because I may have to learn something or change something in myself. And sometimes those things are hard. Education is hard, and discipline is hard. But in the other side of that, you're now creating me to be more of the person that I need to be for you, and I'm starting to adapt myself more to being Christ-like, and to be able to showcase that the Lord in my life as part of your plan. Dear Lord, I thank you for allowing me to be part of that, for seeing that potential within me, and to bringing that potential to light. Something that I would never be able to see or plan or do, but you do it with ease, and you orchestrate it all together through your sovereignty and through your power. And dear Lord, I think that's awesome. I think that's great. I'm so thankful that I get to be part of it. Dear Lord, help us to continue to be challenged in that way, to be part of that plan and purpose. I just think it's an amazing thing, and help us to continue to press forward, help us to lift each other up, help us to just support one another and recognize that provision and that wonderful blessing that's been given to us. Bless this time that we've been here together and in your word. Help it to be a sweet smelling aroma to you, and we ask it in Jesus' precious name. Amen. All right, there you go.